Good afternoon, everyone. This is Mayor Dave Jaworski of the City of Waterloo, welcoming you to the Special Council meeting Monday, August 24th, 2020 at 2 p.m. in the afternoon. At the beginning of this, we will start with a roll call, please.
Councillor Hanmer, Ward 1, present.
Councillor Bodley here. Councillor Bodley here.
Councillor Veith, present.
Councillor Freeman, present.
Councillor Vasic, present.
Councillor Henry, present.
Councillor Bonagor, present.
And the mayor is present too. Could I have a disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof from anyone? Hearing none, we would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather today is land traditionally used by the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral people. We also acknowledge the enduring presence and deep traditional knowledge and philosophies of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today. We'd like to take a moment of reflection. At the beginning of this council meeting, we pause to think about the needs of our community. May we show wisdom and compassion in all our decisions. Next up I have here is the approval of minutes from the July 13th special council meeting. And I'll listen to hear if there's any changes to the minutes. Hearing none, I'll look to Ward 1, Ward 2 to consider moving the minutes.
Councillor Hanmer recommends approval of our minutes, and I will vote in favor of the motion.
Councillor Bodley will second the approval of the minutes and vote in favor.
Councillor Veith, in favor.
Councillor Freeman, in favor.
Councillor Vasic, in favor.
Councillor Henry, in favor.
Councillor Bonagor, in favor.
And the mayor is in favor too. So with that, the minutes are passed. We do not have a consent motion. We're moving straight into staff reports. Item A, which is the Indigenous Reconciliation Action Plan, the plan forward. Report brought to us by Pamela Albrecht, who will be here for questions later. I do not believe there's a presentation from Pamela on this. So why don't we look towards saving any questions for Pamela till after we hear from our 7 or so delegations. And this will be like a regular council meeting where each delegate is able to get up and make their statement for, in most cases, I think for up to 10 minutes. And then I will be also looking at the place where councillors can raise their hands if they want to ask a question of the delegate at that time. And just to make sure that you know that this is just like a regular council meeting. So for councillors to flag if they want to talk to that delegate at that time, because after that, the delegate will go into listening mode for the remainder of the report. First up is Amy Smoke, representative of Land Back Camp. And I'll ask Natalia to let Amy in on the meeting.
Yes, if you could play the video we've submitted.
And it is starting soon, Amy.
Thank you.
Is a place where there are very few services for Indigenous people.
Really important for me having Land Back Camp as a young trans woman who only recently came out within the past year. It's so important having this safe space to be.
I think that Land Back is important because of kids like me, you know, kids that didn't have that chance to grow up around their culture, didn't have the chance to get access to teachings. Without Land Back Camp within itself, I think personally for me, I found myself, I'd be back at square one.
It's really important for Indigenous youth, especially in an urban setting, to have access to culture. That's something so special that Land Back Camp has offered. We want spaces to be welcoming so they can just show up however they are.
Thank you very much, Amy. I think the video has just completed, and I'll turn it back over to you, Amy.
Great, thank you. Sego Siwagwego, Amy Smoke Youngets, Ginyamkahega Ni'i. I'm Mohawk Nation Turtle Clan from the Six Nations of the Grand River. I've lived in Kitchener-Waterloo my entire life. I'm a two-spirit mother, community organizer, event planner, defender, singer, and public speaker. I graduated with a diploma from Conestoga College, a Bachelor of Arts and Social Development Studies, Bachelor of Social Work from the University of Waterloo as well, and a Master's of Social Work in the Indigenous field of study from Wilfrid Laurier. I'm also a formerly homeless, incarcerated sex worker and drug addict. I'm 44 years old. I did not grow up in my culture or on my own res. I did not know who I was. Local First Nations, Métis, and Inuit spaces such as Healing the Seven Generations and White Owl Native Ancestry Association, the post-secondary Indigenous student centers, helped me find my voice, my identity, my strength, and my pride. As one of the founders and organizers of Osi Ganho Hadaje, which means Willow River, the settlers renamed the Grand River, I am helping other First Nations, Métis, Inuit youth, their community, their friends and family find their identity, voice, strength, and pride. As you heard in the video, for whatever reason, there are Indigenous youth who have not been able to access their culture, their songs, their language in this urban center. We do not have a community space, gathering space, or friendship center. So while organizations like Healing Seven Generation and White Owl Native Ancestry and the post-secondary student centers address gaps in accessing culture, we have seen a gap that we are helping to fulfill for the youth that participate in Land Back Camp. In fact, those aforementioned organizations deserve more funding, more space, more resources, and more accolades. Land Back Camp is different. We don't want to replicate the services provided by those organizations, but the dozen or so youth that participate daily in land-based workshops, gardening, recycling, foraging, art, and connecting with Mother Earth have clearly demonstrated their desire for something different. We are Indigenous two-spirit. We are Indigenous women. We are Indigenous youth, led, organized, and founded. We have reclaimed a space that historically founded this region. Adding in the overt and everyday, all-day racism from settlers walking, jogging, and running by, we have managed to hold workshops with materials given by Indigenous community members so that the youth could create, for some of them, their first medicine pouch. With drums donated by Indigenous community members, we have sung alongside youth and families, some for the very first time. With help from a local mural artist, these dozen or so youth have in 6 weeks created an amazing mural that's being painted on our teepee currently. A local big drum group has shared space with us. A wonderful pipe carrier and knowledge carrier sat around our sacred fire with us. Youth in care in foster homes and folks that have aged out of those systems have shared food with us, time with us, and tears with us. All on the land, all at Land Back Camp, all in safe, brave space that we have helped create. We do all of this because just a day after we set up the teepee on June 20th, some youth showed up to help. 3 days later, more youth showed up. Several weeks later, we became a group of many, rotating our sleeping shifts, feeding ourselves, planting a community garden and protected trees, all while caring for each other and the land. We have welcomed allies, accomplices really, into our space because they have educated themselves on their own time, know the land that they are on, and their obligation to it and to us. They help shoulder the burden of educating the settler onlookers who demand our time and emotional labor. I will continue to do this. This is why I am here. I think that the environment we have created should continue. I will continue this work wherever I need to reclaim space, because whether you meet the 4 requirements in our petition, there is always work to do in my Indigenous community. Now I'm Miigwech, Kininiskomitin, and I turn it over to one of the youth sitting beside me, Olivia.
Hello, I'm Olivia. I have a simple number for you. It's 27. Simply put, I'm 27. You might wonder why that really matters. Well, 27 is the number of years that it has taken me to find the small space of people to share my stolen culture with. 27 is the number of years it has taken me to find resources to learn my stolen language. 27 is the number of years I have longed for my community, searched for it, and been denied it. 27 is the number of years it has taken me to simply be able to drum with my people. Now, to some, 27 may not be a lot, but to me, that's my whole life. I'm part of this, I'm part of Land Back in hopes that one day that number never needs to be repeated. I'm part of this so that one day a child may be able to walk through their own community and see themselves, their culture, and their heritage represented on their own stolen land. So that when they're alone and disconnected, they can take a short walk and find a place that they will always belong. I am part of this so that one day, instead of being on this side, someone will be sitting with you there, having a say in what happens to this land. I am part of this in hopes I will one day not have to say stolen land or demand representation on it. I have another number for you, 0. 0 is the amount of time that I should have gone away from my people. 0 is the amount of time any child should have to search for their own community. 0 is the number of easily accessible Indigenous places that I have found within Kitchener-Waterloo. And 0 is the number of Indigenous council members I'm speaking to right now. The demands of Land Back are simple: representation, respect, and space. Something that should already be a thing, but instead I have to be here to remind you that me and my people aren't gone, nor are we leaving. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy and Olivia. We did not have Olivia listed here, so for the minutes, if we could get Olivia's full name to our clerks, that would be good for our minutes for next time around. I see a question here from Councillor Vasic for Amy or Olivia. Go ahead, Councillor Vasic.
Thank you so much to the both of you for sharing your experiences. I know how much I appreciate learning. I'm so far away from knowing more, but I appreciate the learning I've done from Indigenous folks who have helped me learn that decolonization for me is also about learning about where I come from, and I've been doing a lot of that learning lately as well. So to hear you speak about what that means to you, it was very powerful to me. So I thank you for that. And also I have a question. And what I want to know is what would it have meant to you if from 0 you had really been able to be a part of your culture, and what will it mean for the youth of today who are at 0, who are Indigenous, who will benefit from the work that comes out of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and other reconciliation efforts?
Are we unmuted?
You're good, Amy. Go ahead. Or Olivia, whoever wants to take this one.
Yeah, you know what? Both of us could answer. You know, I am watching Sky, my 6-year-old daughter, who has started her journey in this world from birth. Before birth, I was pregnant with Sky during my time in the Indigenous student centers as well. And she could teach some of the settler education. She shouldn't have to. Watching her put on her regalia when she hears the music and can sing the songs, can speak her language, can say the Thanksgiving address in Mohawk. That is the important thing. She is part of a transformative time right now. And it's important then that you look at all of the aspects of education and your place in it as settlers, as white community members here in Kitchener-Waterloo.
For me, it would have meant a place to belong, and it would have meant a community, because I didn't grow up with the community that I have thankfully been able to find now. I was taken away from that community, adopted into a white household, and I lost a lot of the spirit and the joys and the learning and the teachings And these are all things that I'm now having to refine. These are things that as a child, my heart yearned for. And I was screaming out for help and for hope and couldn't find it. And so having those teachings from the very beginning would have given me that. I wouldn't have probably gone through some of my darkest days. I would have probably been in a much better place, in fact, than I am today. And instead, I'm now learning, and I'm having to learn so late in life these things that are saving me every single day.
Thank you so much. Those are for words of joy and celebration and hope amidst challenging having that been taken away from you. Thank you so much for sharing that with me.
Thank you, Councillor Vasic. I have one more question from Councillor Bodley. Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Amy or Olivia. I just want to start. I have recently the region of Waterloo hosted anti-racism town hall, and there were a couple of main takeaways. There were many takeaways that I had from listening to the discussion there. But a couple of the main takeaways that I had were, one was to stop asking racialized folks to justify that racism exists within our community. I'll set that aside for a second. The second one is challenging us to be willing to engage in uncomfortable conversations. And so I just wanted to say thank you to Amy and the Land Back Camp for sort of pushing forward this agenda and challenging us here at Council to have these difficult conversations. So a couple of questions here. As you noted, Amy, there are many excellent Indigenous-led organizations in the region. And also, as you noted, sort of the existence of the camp suggests that there are members of the Indigenous community whose needs are not being met or who have maybe fallen through the cracks. From your perspective, I have two questions. One, what are your thoughts, first off, on, I don't know if you've had a chance to read the staff report, which references at least one of the requests from the group, which is with respect to waiving rental fees. So any feedback or question, any feedback you may be able to provide to us on the plan from a City of Waterloo perspective, I would appreciate that. And the second one is, how do we, and noting that this is a regional initiative and we are the lower tier municipality, how do we ensure that voices from many Indigenous communities, including yourselves, continue to be heard and engaged as part of this consulting process, so that we are getting diverse opinions and perhaps in continuing these challenging conversations?
So regarding the, rental spaces, fees in public spaces, and particularly the City of Waterloo, we do host the powwow in Waterloo Park. That is never easy. The processes we go through, the permits, the fees, we have to book it a year in advance. This is all extremely problematic. I do it not on the city's time, my own, when I'm currently working as the powwow coordinator at the University of Waterloo. It's extremely difficult to have to be at the whim of the city to practice our own culture and traditions on one day. The in-kind or alliance service affiliate agreement that we go through also includes, logos, media advertising that we do for our powwow that includes the City of Waterloo. When this is our event, it's for us. It is for us to celebrate. We are not partners in that agreement. It doesn't feel as though we are receiving the same respect that other other events, all of the things that go on in public spaces. We just don't feel like, I personally don't feel like it's ever been equal or that this is our event we must partner with, and we don't receive a whole lot of other help for that from the City of Waterloo. And I'm sorry, could you repeat the second question?
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm known to ramble there, so I apologize for that. The second one was around recognizing that the sort of broader plan is going to be driven by the region through consultants, how do we ensure that your voice or your group's voice is engaged amongst the other Indigenous community groups within the region as the sort of broader reconciliation action plan is being built out at the region, I guess?
In particular, we actually didn't meet anyone from the region. We met with cities. We met with the cities. We met with the mayors. I believe the chair sent an email through a staff member that said that they wanted to visit. They did not wait for a reply or a confirmation of a date and time, and simply showed up with no tobacco, with nothing in hand, to view our space, I guess. So I don't really know where they even got all of their information from, other than the fact that we had been speaking to city officials in Waterloo and Kitchener. So them to suddenly decide that they would like to hire an Indigenous consultant or like firm or person, that is not really what we had asked for. And I'll speak to it, you know, the leadership here at Land Back Camp deserves that seat at that table. Everybody, you know, someone from each of the organizations who actually see Indigenous youth and provide support in their spaces should have a voice at those tables as well. I don't know where the region's getting that person from or consulting firm from. And it's a little troubling to me that they've sort of gone beyond and asked for a third party when we provided some of the information. We can provide some of that information for you.
Thank you for that, Amy. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you, Amy and Olivia. I see no further questions, so what you'll want to do is to go on mute, and that we listen into the other delegates than the staff report questions, if any. Thank you. Next up, I have Kai Rymer Watts, resident of Kitchener. Go ahead, Kai, when you're ready.
Sure. I believe I should be unmuted now. Is this working?
Yeah, it sounds coming through loud and clear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I just want to start by saying thank you to Amy and Olivia for sharing. Really, my delegation is just meant to support and to share just about myself. I'm a white cisgendered settler. I grew up in the Mennonite community here in Waterloo region, and I now live in Kitchener. I attend school in Waterloo, or I did in person before the pandemic, as a PhD student in community psychology at Wilfrid Laurier. And I think I know some of you as in my capacity as a climate activist and artist. So I'm speaking today as an independent citizen in full support of the Land Back Camp and its core demands. I'm not a part of the camp, but I have really been amazed and inspired by it since it started. And I also want to acknowledge my privilege as a non-Indigenous person to be a visitor on these lands, the benefits that I gain here as a visitor each and every day, which lead me to try to live a life that treads more lightly with humility, to be a better ally to Indigenous peoples and their work, and to uphold, my own responsibilities of caring for the land and for all beings on it, human and non-human. And so these are values that, you know, I was lucky to, some of which I was lucky to be taught growing up in the Mennonite community. And I can only imagine really what it would be like to not grow up with access to your own culture. I do want to also just acknowledge that the challenge of technology that we're on. I could never have imagined doing a council delegation from home. And so to state the obvious, you know, we are living within the midst of multiple crises. And I really hope with that in mind, that council is taking these delegations and issues raised as seriously as ever. I mean, clearly now is the time to act. Growing up in this region, I had very little exposure to Indigenous history or culture today. And that's an erasure that I know now is wrong. It took me far too long to realize growing up that we are not only on Indigenous lands, but there are also thousands of Indigenous peoples still living through the region. And I wish I had known that much sooner. And not knowing this, it's given me very little to no opportunity to build relationship myself. And so to me, not growing up with a knowledge of and dedicated space for local Indigenous culture, I mean, it has clearly been a loss for Indigenous peoples, but I would say also for all people. And to me also, I think it's kind of absurd that it's not until I reached graduate studies that I began to learn about Indigenous culture and ongoing presence in the region. And even then, was really through actively seeking out that knowledge. And so the reality that so many within the region don't know about the treaties that exist between settlers and Indigenous peoples on these lands, treaties like the Haldeman Treaty of 1784, which promised nearly 1 million acres to Six Nations people on the Grand River, including the lands we're on. And yet Six Nations now occupy less than 5% of that original territory promised. Or the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Treaty between Indigenous nations here. So to not grow up with this knowledge, I think, is harmful and wrong. I'm sure there's still plenty else I still don't know or have ignorance about. And to me, this is an erasure that's evidence of how Indigenous peoples have been systematically oppressed by colonization. So I guess I ask you to consider what this lack of knowledge of relationship has meant in your own life, particularly at a time I know Council declared last fall a climate emergency. We are living within a time of ecological and social crisis. And we need to be learning from our Indigenous brothers, sisters, and Two-Spirit people about how to live more sustainably and more caringly on these lands. And so all of the demands from the Land Back Camp to me is really an opportunity to engage in this journey of deeper healing and learning at a time when that's so urgently needed. And I just want to say it's really, I think, one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in this region. I think it's quite incredible. So I really hope that this story, continues towards a path of genuine healing relationships, not to end with a disappointment that's been far too common and has often been a result of settlers just, once again letting down our responsibility of the relationship. And that just leads to more frustration, more cynicism, more distrust, and more anger. And so, I really, really hope that we see this as an opportunity to begin moving in the right direction. I think with humility, it's a beautiful opportunity. I think it's also worth reflecting that, to my knowledge, we have signed on to the Haldeman Treaty, but have really not been paying rent on these lands for the last 100+ years. And so these are original agreements where debt has accrued on our end. And at the very minimum, we should be enacting these demands to begin upholding our side of these agreements. So I think, to me, this is a resounding yes to all of these. I think it's quite a beautiful opportunity. I can't claim to understand, through my own lived experiences as a white settler of privilege, all of the forms of oppression and stigmatization that Indigenous peoples have had to endure, for generations. And what I can do, what I hope to do, is to listen, to acknowledge these wrongdoings as legitimate, and then really to get to work. I mean, that's clearly what we're being called to do today. And I think, we've been listening a long time. It's important to just take the action that has been so clearly laid out for us. The first two demands should be pretty easy, I would think, to enact quickly, and would demonstrate the city and region's good faith in moving forwards. The demand that all fees be waived, I cannot imagine that would be difficult to implement. And the demand for land in Victoria Park and Waterloo Park for gathering and ceremonial purpose is extremely reasonable. And really, we should be leaning into that and celebrating that. I think so many other communities have spaces like this. I just want to reflect again, growing up in the Mennonite community, the vast number of churches that are spread throughout the region, which clearly have access to space, to land, to practice their culture. And so, again, this seems like a minimum step that we should be taking. In the spirit of creating space, I think I will just end it there for myself. And I just want to dedicate any extra time I have, I can't see a clock, but to the youth and the stories that they're sharing. And I really hope that this council meeting moves towards action. Thank you.
Thank you, Kai. And I was going to give you notice that you're almost out of time, but certainly everybody will have their chance to speak on this. I would just let you know that this council started December 1st, 2018, and the very first thing we move into is a strategic plan. And it takes us a number of months to do consultations and work on that, but I can assure you that truth and reconciliation and responding to the municipal components of that was put directly into our strategic plan in June of 2019, and then we instruct staff to move forward on that. So that did start in 2019, but we realized that this is just a start. Long way to go. So thank you, Kai. I do not see any questions for you. I'll let you go on mute, and you can listen to the rest of the meeting. Next up, I have delegate number 3, Laurie Campbell, resident of Waterloo.
Hi, everybody. This is Laurie Campbell. I'm just going to address a few different things and kind of reinforce some of the things that we heard from Amy and some things that we might be hearing after from other delegations. But to start off, I just want to be clear and to assure people that I am indeed an Indigenous person. I am Cree Métis from Treaty 6 territory. I also have lived experience as an Indigenous queer two-spirit person. I have also obtained the necessary mainstream educational documentation to prove my expertise by colonial standards. And although I'm still a learner, like all of my Indigenous relations are, I do carry with me traditional knowledge. And I say this, which is new for me to sort of say at any sort of public engagement, but I say it because there seems to be a practice that I'm noticing a lot lately in this particular community of compartmentalizing these labels or titles, is only one piece can be embodied in any one Indigenous individual. And so I just want to clarify that that would be an inaccurate assumption. We don't, certainly Amy or myself and other delegations that may be speaking, we're not, we may have academic credentials, but that doesn't erase our indigeneity or our experience of being an Indigenous person and those sorts of things, or our understanding of traditional knowledge. And so sometimes, and when I see things, including some of the documents that come out, it might say that you need somebody who is a traditional knowledge keeper. There's many in this community, and sometimes that is also the same person who happens to be somebody who has navigated the mainstream academic system. So I just wanted to clarify that part for the record. I made a few points about a few different things I wanted to touch on. I did read through your report. I've also read through the RFP and circulated that from the region as well. I do want to also speak to interjurisdictional ambiguity and the concern about that having an effect that can override services and supports to those who need it most in our community. And that being said, I do recognize, and I'm actually, very appreciative that it does appear as though the region and both cities are working alongside each other in development of, some reconciliatory work. And so I do want to recognize that and appreciate that whatever interjurisdictional issues that may be happening, hopefully you're having them behind your own closed doors, because that should not be affecting us who live in the region. Point number 2, several different council members as well as some community members have been pretty happy to bring to my attention that not all Indigenous peoples are in support of the land back occupation. And I just want to clarify that is absolutely valid. But Indigenous peoples are not a homogenous group. And one example I gave at regional council to relay this was, sort of saying that, I would probably be correct in the assumption that not all white people within your particular wards voted for you to be councillors. And so, there is differences among different populations, and we don't all need to be a homogenous group. And it's an unrealistic expectation to think that Indigenous peoples would be that as well. And as Amy said, there's some amazing Indigenous-led organizations in our region providing great services for Indigenous peoples, but the land back camp is filling a service gap. And this is, some of the things that Amy was referring to in their statement. Referring to the press release, consulting more broadly with Indigenous peoples, presumably to be inclusive of those who are already accessing other services provided. I think that we need to be cautious there, because this, will only lead to replicating more of what the region already has to offer, while at the same time further marginalizing the folks who are falling between the service gaps, such as those that are engaging with the land back camp. Point number 3, the unilateral decision by the collective group of city and region to move forward with a public procurement process seeking someone with Indigenous consulting expertise is not, it's ambiguous, but it's also something that wasn't asked for. And again, Amy touched on this. I have some concerns with that. I'm seeing the RFPs coming in, and from the organizations that they're coming in, there's some Indigenous ones, which are great now. I managed to get that from the east to the west coast circulated in the last 24 hours. But there's lots of concern about how is those decision going to be made about who's selecting the consultant firm. Now, I've read through the RFP that's been put forward and see where different weights are. And I noticed things like demonstrating understanding of local Indigenous issues and communities is only rated at 10% out of the 100% of the firm that you're looking for. And so I have some concerns about that. And I also have some concerns about which Indigenous peoples are going to be helping make that choice of which consultant that you're going to go with. Because if you don't have representation from the people at land back or Indigenous community who are the frontline on the ground workers, then you will not be able to accurately make a selection that's actually going to meet the needs of what's being asked for. And that, kind of speaks to Kai's, just the there's a lack of education that has occurred, for all of us. And it's been systemic and systematic. And we need to catch up and fill that gap. But until we do, it would be having council members of cities and the regions make the decision about the consultant firm is again, it's just only going to replicate what you're probably most familiar with, and it's still going to leave those service gaps. So I have some concerns about that. I don't need to touch on this point. I don't think. I looked at. I was pleased to see. I had read, the city's strategic plan and saw the work that had been in there about the reconciliatory work, and so I do appreciate that. I am wondering again about who's making the decisions about that money and who is that money going to serve. So when you talk to the 25,000 in approved capital budget, which Indigenous person is making the decisions on how that money is going to be spent? And there's two things that are different here, and it was kind of interesting. Both Kai and Amy spoke before me, but there's education that council needs and that the broader community needs about Indigenous peoples, but also about the history of colonization and what sort of that means and how that's impacted settler and intergenerational settler relations with Indigenous peoples. And so that's one piece of education. But then there's also what Land Back is doing. It's about Indigenous for Indigenous, right? And so that is not events or gatherings that are necessarily for sort of the rest of the community. These are things that we need, like we heard Olivia speak to, that she is a stronger learning her language, and it's just dear to my heart because she's Cree, and I don't run into a lot of Cree out here, and it's a beautiful thing. And so we need spaces for that, and that will make the region a better and stronger region when we can work with our people and help them gain confidence in who they are and their leadership skills, and they will contribute back to the broader region. And so they're kind of two different things. And so my concern is sometimes the resources that come out to educate settler community, white people within our region, and newcomers, which is important, but it's different. And we will still be, having our youth wander the streets and, either being engaged in criminal activity or suffering the consequences of criminalizing poverty and homelessness and addiction and mental health issues. I do appreciate our agreement, speaking in this moment as the director of the center, the Waterloo Indigenous Student Center. I do appreciate our agreement that has been put in place to support the powwow. And I just want to clarify that including the resources that is provided by the city, that's about a 30,000 budget I operate under. And a good chunk of that is also just raised through public donations through St. Paul's, through public donors. And that particular event does serve a broad region, members of the community. And so I just wanted to note on that. And I feel like there might be one typo in the report that's within the package here. There's a line that says, and that the Land Back Camp organizers recognize on their Facebook page that they do not speak for the local Indigenous group. I think what was meant there was that the Land Back leadership is not speaking for the entire local Indigenous group, not just saying they're not speaking for the local Indigenous group. And so maybe if there's further questions that you might want to refer back to Amy just to clarify that, but they certainly do speak for a component of the local Indigenous group who is needing supports and services. So thank you.
Thank you, Laurie, and duly noted on the last one. That's obviously something that makes a lot of sense. And thank you for your entire presentation. And I will have questions of staff later on that. Thank you for using your time wisely and getting in a lot of information to us. I do see one question from Councillor Vasek. Go ahead, Councillor.
Thanks through you, Mayor. Jaworski. Oh my gosh, I have a lot of feedback. Can you give me one second to switch to my phone? I can't.
Yeah, go ahead. We'll wait. Okay, Councilor Bassett, can you hear me?
Hello?
Hi, are you still microphone?
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I can't actually hear anything because of the feedback. So what you said was totally muffled. Hello?
I think you have two microphones. One on your phone, one on your computer.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, everybody. Councilor Bodley has a question. Could you try?
You may have the same problem with your microphone.
Hello?
Councilor Bassett. Clicking function F1.
Yeah, I tried that. Hello?
Is your audio still connected on your computer? Are you hearing it through computer and your phone?
I'm only hearing it through the phone. And I'm hearing you twice and over top of you, and then I'm hearing myself at the same time.
Do you want to just disconnect for a moment?
Yeah, for sure.
Over to you, Councilor Bodley. Oh, hold on.
Oh, you know what it is?
Who is it?
Lori, can I get you for a moment? I think that was actually causing the duplication. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can, Councilor. You can go ahead.
Oh, I'm so sorry, everybody.
No, go ahead. Fine.
Okay, so Lori, is Lori there still? Okay, I'm going to ask I'll ask the question. I think she's on mute, if I caught that at the end there. So just thinking about what you're saying about capturing difference within Indigenous communities, and also the comments that Councillor Bodley made about meaningful engagement, and some of you have also talked about this kind of meaningful engagement and relationship building. I'm wondering if you can speak to the concepts of the quote unquote preferred or inconvenient Indians, and how these concepts should be considered as the city moves forward with the truth and reconciliation work, and as well, more immediately, the hiring of a consultant, and in if approved, developing the policy for use of land for ceremony.
Right. I mean, we've all often heard that representation matters, and it does absolutely matter. But, you know, again, back to where I was speaking about, you know, indigeneity being homogenous, there's vast difference among Indigenous peoples, and even within our region, there's differences of our engagement and the kind of roles that we play both within our professional lives and within the community, right? And so one of the things that I often see is you have this, you know, amazing group of strong, educated, traditional knowledge keepers who have lived experience, who are bringing a voice forward. And then in order to answer the calls to action that they've put forward, leadership goes to different Indigenous peoples entirely who are, you know, already in some instances, you know, maybe having their needs already met within the community by different services. And so with that, you tend to like replicate the services that are already there, and you're going to leave people who are, you know, calling out for help and support right now by the wayside. And so the other thing that often happens is same like, you know, like as Indigenous people, you know, just use this is an example. I mean, there's Indigenous people that belong to like all of the mainstream political parties, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that if you're aligning on that front versus those who are actually the ones who have a need and are putting something forward, you're going to get different answers and different responses. And so sometimes some of the most vocal voices may seem to be the inconvenient Indigenous person, and seeking out somebody who's a little bit more palatable to what the, you know, how mainstream is already functioning might be the chosen one to work with mainstream to actually try and address the issues of community. And that's, you know, it's simply not going to work. And so, you know, there's a concern about the consultant. I'm not in support of the consultant. Let me be clear. I didn't say that, I didn't get that out in the first part, but I'm not in support of the consultant. That's not what one of the demands and requests that was asked for. The request was to take that money and invest it to hire somebody. I think it's great that the cities in the region are going to work together on this. I think that's a really smart strategic plan. But what was called for was a hire who can lead this work for the region and for Indigenous peoples here. Not money to be spent on a consultant that, by all means, when I read through the RFP and the other things, it looks like they're predominantly providing education and support to the region versus necessarily meeting the needs of the Indigenous community. And so those are the kind of things I think that are important to remember. And it also does kind of tie back into when I was talking about, like, you know, as Indigenous peoples, many of us do embody, you know, academic expertise, professional expertise, traditional knowledge, expertise, and lived experience. But there's, on the other flip side, there's also many that don't, and that's okay. It's just different, and it's important to think about what work you're trying to do and who you engage to help you and to take that work forward.
Thanks so much, Lori. Would you have any advice? Can you mute yourself? Sorry. Thank you. Would you have any advice in thinking or for council as we move ahead with this work when we're feeling like we might not want to engage people whose voices might be louder, or the outcomes might seem more consequential or scarier within sort of this Western framework? Any words of advice or wisdom for how we might be able to address that discomfort from your perspective?
Right. Again, another good question. And it is, I mean, this has, you know, been my entire career path as well, right? It is awkward and uncomfortable and challenging work. And that just is what it is. And I think, you know, we need to be okay with being a little bit uncomfortable. Again, back to what Kai said, it's like we were all, certainly, you know, our age group, you know, Sky's different. Amy's girl Sky is different and has a different experience, but certainly for like all of us, you know, collectively here, we never had opportunity to, like that uncomfortableness that was put there. It was like sort of strategically put there, and we need to kind of work through that in order to really do the work. And I think, you know, one of the things I was so impressed about, and still am, when I came to the region, was the relationship with you know, Indigenous leadership and with our elected officials, municipal, provincial, and federal. And you know, I think it's absolutely fantastic. I think we have a long track record of and previous to my time here, of, you know, really you know, good framework for relationships that have been respectful and had some good conversation. What I failed to see is some of the concrete sort of core resources put forward to actually take it to the next level. And that could be, you know, I envision it as like a really beautiful thing for this region to, you know, to sort of, you know, take that forward and to, you know, do some things that may not have been done in other places, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we can't do them here. And so, you know, I think about those kinds of things.
Thank you. That's a really eloquent way of saying maybe put your money where your mouth is. The relationships are so important, but so are the investment of the resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Vasic. Over to Councillor Bodley.
Thank you, through your Mayor Jaworski. Notwithstanding some of the commentary or criticism that you put forward of the discussion from the region's perspective with respect to the consultant, what we're looking at today here from a city perspective in the staff report that we've been provided, I'm wondering if you have similar question that I had to Amy. I'm wondering if you have any comments regarding the two specific recommendations around sort of suspending rental fees, 1, and 2, asking staff to develop a policy around supporting access for public spaces for Indigenous peoples. Do you have any comments to provide to us or feedback, positive and or negative, on those 2 specific things? And then secondly, do you have any sort of recommendations on something that is, you know, very much missing perhaps from where we are right now? Any comments you may have on that, I would appreciate.
Thank you for your question. I think, you know, yes, the suspending rental fees is a must, and I appreciate that that's in there. I think in developing the policy around that, again, I would ask which Indigenous people are going to help create that policy, because in my capacity in post-secondary, I've certainly been a part of. I read some, you know, great policy and some not so good policy, and I get that this isn't an issue of saying, you know, that or council is going to do it wrong because they mean to do it wrong. It's about having the right people at the table to inform it, because one of the things that I see right now perpetually happening in this region is something's brought forward by the Indigenous community, and then different councils have taken it sort of back and think that they're addressing it and come out with, sort of spit something else back out. But there's been a loss in like translation or understanding. And so, you know, I see something come back where it seems like leadership is like, thinks they've come up with something that's great and wonderful and it's going to address the issue. But because there's like some gap in that conversation or consultation to really like have, as Amy had said, like sort of alongside each other, working together in an equitable way to have input to that, there's points that are going to be missed. And this is partly around like cultural competency. And again, back to that education piece that we all missed out on. So I do have some concerns about what that policy will look like, because I've had policies come back where all of a sudden it's, you know, it's wonderful. It's going to be fees are waived. You can use this space when you want, but you need to give us 2 weeks notice. And that may seem reasonable in the way that council creates most policy, but it's not reasonable if we have a death in our community, for example, that has just occurred, and we get a notice where we need to get together. Somebody's called for community to come together, and we need to get together in 5 hours. And we need to have access to our ceremonial fire space. We need to have access to our gathering space and all those things. And so I'm concerned that some of those things might be missed if council, and staff, whatever, create this unilaterally. And the second thing I guess that I would speak to it is the investment in hiring somebody, an Indigenous person, to actually work for the city, or when I say like region, like this on this collective plan, however you want to put it forward, to actually lead some of this work. And and their position is kind of twofold. Then it's to partly do education internally, so that when statements come out or policies come out, there's been some engagement, so that it's been done in a more fulsome way, but also to engage with and meet the needs of Indigenous people in the community, and all Indigenous people in the community, right? I mean, land back is the voice that's coming out in the forefront, but like Amy said, there's needs that H7G and White Owl also have, and probably other Indigenous peoples in the community as well.
Excellent, thank you for that, Lori.
Thank you. I don't see any further questions, but Lori, we are trying to figure out what is causing the echoing. Is it possible that there's 2 delegations in the room that you're sharing, perhaps?
No, it's just me, and everything else I have off. I just came off another Zoom meeting and it was all working fine, so.
Yeah, no, okay, thanks, Lori. No, it was all good. It was all good. Your presentation all came out loud and clear. We just, gremlins in the system, I guess. Next up, we have Sean Johnston, who is a representative of the Land Back Camp as well.
Awesome. Hello, can you hear me?
Absolutely, Sean.
Hello, Mayor Zawarski. Baju ani bangishimo Indijna cause kuchiching no ninjaba makwadodam. My English name is Sean Johnston. I'm a Two-Spirit Anishinaabe, originally from Kuchiching First Nations, located on Treaty 3 territory. I've been residing down here in this territory for the last 12 years. When this camp started, I expected Amy, Tara, and myself to be sitting in front of this teepee for the summer. We did not expect this reclamation camp to turn into a space for queer youth and young adults. We would learn that many of the young people at this camp identify as queer, two-spirit, transgender, and or non-binary. We learned that many of them were adopted or in the foster care system with no connection to their culture. They were wanting to learn, they were wanting to reconnect. They were wanting to learn about their indigeneity. We are still growing. A mother now visits our space often with her Indigenous transgender son. He's one of the youngest people in our space. We've also shared space recently with Family and Children's Services and their newly formed Indigenous Pride Youth Group. We look forward to working with them and welcoming their youth into our space. Land Back Camp continues to grow in a safe space for Indigenous young people to decolonize, reconnect, reclaim, and be proud of who they are. These are one of the reasons why we are fighting for this. We want spaces for our youth to become the leaders that they're meant to be. We are asking the cities to waive the fees involved so we can gather in ceremony. We are asking the cities in the region to start addressing the recommendations made by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that came out 5 years ago. We are asking that you start working with the Indigenous peoples of Kitchener-Waterloo by creating an Indigenous Advisory Committee. We are demanding that we be brought to the table. Enough of the research reports with no results. It's time that you listen to what we have to say. No empty promises to do better. We want you to start listening to us. We want you to start working with us. We need to move beyond the territorial acknowledgement and start to move into action. It's time that the region and both cities start working towards change with the Indigenous communities. It's time for change. And I would like to give my remaining time to a youth that's been a part of our camp from the beginning, Ryan.
Tanzi, my name is Ryan Makde Maingan. I am 21 years old and I am Nahiawe. I am Cree. We have occupied the Land Back Camp at Victoria Park for the past 65 days and counting. In the time I had spent at the camp, I have shared both positive and discouraging experiences alike. I have faced issues of blatant racism, discrimination, and outwardly threatening scenarios in our efforts to reclaim our land. I believe that this experience, though, has transformed me into a stronger man. I have been gifted teachings that I never could have received without the camp or the individuals who made it possible. I believe that access to ceremonial space and traditional teachings within our region and cities are not only important, but necessary. As an Indigenous youth raised in the foster care system in this very city, I have found it downright impossible to access traditional teachings and safe spaces for me and my family to learn about the history of our own culture and the first peoples of this land. The actions that have been taken in reclaiming the lands at Victoria Park makes me hopeful that we will find success in our efforts to create safe ceremonial space for Indigenous people, on our traditional lands, as should have always existed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you for including Ryan. It's always good to get new, fresh voices and somebody so well spoken as that to the cell phone here. I'm looking for any questions. I don't see any for you, Sean or Ryan, at this time. So thank you very much, and thank you for your well-spoken and forthright commentary. As you know, I think, well, we've had Amy, Lori, and yourself speak, and certainly brought up the powwow. I think that's a good example of where we came we came quote, so far in terms of like bringing it on to Waterloo Park, and we have so far yet to go to make sure it's done in the right way. So thank you for the commentary on that. Powwow, I know, is, as you know, is something special to the citizens of Waterloo and in my heart as well. Next up, I have Delegate Bethany Karn, resident of Kitchener.
Hello?
Hello, Bethany.
Hi. My name is Bethany Karn. I'm a resident of Kitchener, a settler, and a guest on this land. I'm here to speak in support of the Land Back Camp and their 4 demands. When my ancestors came to this land, they started a genocide against Indigenous peoples. That genocide has not ended to this day, as we see with the continuing crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people, and the removal of Indigenous children from their homes at rates much higher than non-Indigenous children. I am not responsible for starting this genocide, but I, along with all other settlers on this land we call Canada, am responsible for doing everything I can to bring it to an end and to support Indigenous sovereignty and Indigenous rights. Saying yes to these demands would be a step in that direction. Consultations to decide what Indigenous communities in KW need, while these 4 demands are put off or implemented only in part, will further harm Indigenous people. As settlers, we need to do so much more than what has been demanded here, but this can be a start. Saying yes to all 4 of these demands in their entirety can be how we show that we are finally beginning to listen to Indigenous people and can be a first step towards reconciliation. Moving forward, it is imperative that any consultations, initiatives, or programs for or about Indigenous peoples in the region be led by a local Indigenous person who is hired through core funding and who has the expertise, lived experience, and ties to the local community, which are needed to do the work. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Bethany. Well said. I'll look to councillors to see if there are any questions for this delegate. And I do not. So thank you very much, Bethany. Next up, I have Alexandra Honore, resident of Waterloo.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Alexandra.
Hi, my name is Ali Curry, and I'm speaking today as a resident of Waterloo to also talk about the issue of our collective duties as privileged settlers on these unceded lands, to take on our collective responsibility to begin to rectify the systemic oppression and Indigenous erasure from the colonist practices continuing right here today. Before volunteering at the Land Back Camp, being a white settler person, I had not witnessed much overt racism, but that has changed in the past month as I've seen people forcefully enter the sectioned off space of the camp. I've seen people yell things at us as they run by, taunt and circle us in the middle of the night, and much more. I've even heard an Indigenous youth there mention that they overheard a parent in the park telling their kids not to play over there because those people are savages. It is very clear that this area has a problem with racism against Indigenous peoples. I've also witnessed extremely powerful moments of the Indigenous communities at Land Back Camp, where people feel welcomed and at home in a public space for the first time, where people learn about who they are and where young people who have already endured serious traumas as direct results of the millennials who have introduced a generational trauma finally have a chance to partake and belong somewhere that is healthy for their souls to recover. As I understand, the demands made by the Land Back Camp have largely had a positive response from council, but after months, they have yet to be met. These demands are really the absolute bare minimum that needs to happen for any attempt at reconciliation. Article 43 of the Truth and Reconciliation of Canada, aka TRC, specifically directs municipal governments in their framework for reconciliation to be in the full adoption of the United Nations Declaration of Rights on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, aka UNDRIP. One vital article in UNDRIP is Article 11, which states that Indigenous peoples have the right to practice and revitalize their cultural traditions and customs. This includes the right to maintain, protect, and develop the past, present, and future manifestations of their cultures and ceremonies. The fact that the actions now being taken forth by the cities mentioned in the petition were only started after the Land Back Camp took the initiative to write them out and create them themselves, when really the cities should have come up with something themselves, makes me worry that there is little conviction behind the initiatives within the City Council. I'm also concerned that the local Indigenous organizers who show obvious leadership in doing the work to get the ball rolling and creating this reconciliation will not be properly consulted with on the formulation of their demands. The importance of this concern is underscored by our UNDRIP Article 15, which states that states shall take effective measures in consultation and cooperation with the Indigenous peoples concerned to combat prejudice and eliminate discrimination, to promote tolerance, understanding, and good relations among Indigenous peoples and all other segments of society. I am again highlighting the part of the article pertaining to the requirement for consultation and cooperation, specifically with the Indigenous peoples concerned, as I have heard about an intermediary consulting firm may be hired instead. Finally, I read in a CBC article from 8 months ago that as a means for the cities of Waterloo and Kitchener to address the CRC, they would be given Indigenous competency training programs early this year. If I may, I'd like to ask 2 short questions. As for questions for myself, I'm happy to forego those to discuss the questions I have. What have council members taken away from this training as mentioned? And how have they implemented this training when working on demands from the Land Back Camp?
Hi, Ali. Just so you know, you still have another minute if you wish to present, or if you finish, let us know.
Oh, that's fine. I'm finished.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Ali. With respect to that aspect, we did have to put a lot of our in-person training and that on hold because of COVID-19, unfortunately. So that really set us back. I would also offer that, as I mentioned in my opening, that when we developed our strategic plan from December 2018 to June of 2019, truth and reconciliation work was put into that strategic plan. And then we had a report from staff back about a year ago now on the actions that we need to take to move forward. But fully understand that we aren't moving fast enough, but I would just want to make sure that you were aware that we had done work prior to this year on that. We still have a lot more to do. I don't see any questions from councillors. So thanks very much. You can go on mute and continue to listen in. And our last delegate is Tara Sharp, resident of Wilmot Township.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can, Tara.
Okay, thank you. Hi, Ani, bonjour, this is Tara Chartrand. I'm Algonquin Nation, Kitchissipparini territory, Crane Clan, and I live in New Dundee. My current address, however, is Osigonhu Hadache in Victoria Park. I'm an artist. I have a background in technology. I've lived in Waterloo region for over 23 years, working in many industries. And I'm also a co-organizer and co-founder of Land Back Camp. I'm a land defender, and I live here as an Anishinaabe person under the Dish with One Spoon wampum agreement. There's just one thing I want to flag before that I've heard now at 2 council meetings that I want to address and have everyone maybe consider before they repeat another land acknowledgement. No one here shares the land with the Neutral Nations people, as they are extinct. That is a definite erasure of the history of this territory. Neutral Nations were decimated by European disease and illness, and then the rest were absolutely destroyed through genocide by colonization. So you do not share the land with Neutral Nations. Prior to the occupation. I would like to know, and this is maybe a rhetorical question, one I've asked a few times, so maybe people actually have an answer now. How many people can identify, especially councillors, being as you're the leaders of this community, the leaders-elect, name locations of more than 5 Indigenous sites in Waterloo Region? Can any of you name over 10? Can anyone name a single ceremonial site other than land back camp, ancestral or contemporary? And did you know that land back camp is a ceremonial site? Land back camp is located where it is because there is a deep history of ceremony and gathering in this space in Victoria Park, but it is not unique. There are many, many spaces like this throughout Waterloo Region, including in the city of Waterloo. A youth project, Enda Young, Our Home, a project that was conducted over a single year, funded by the Community Foundation, addressed erasure, and in 2 months, a group of youth described over 15 sites. That project has been put on hold as well due to COVID-19, but watch for its release in ways through technology. Since the youth have identified those sites, one of the main contemporary sites has been closed. It's been shuttered and padlocked. Closure of ceremonial sites has an impact on community and causes erasure. We see this time and time again where community identifies with a site, they come together, they gather there, they feel like they've created family and space, they call the ancestors to the land, and then they are removed from that space because we are at the mercy of the landowner. Being Indigenous to somewhere means being of the land itself. We are owned by the land as much as we, in quotes, own the land. We are as Indigenous as the plants and animals. The erasure in this region extends to the lived experience of Indigenous people in Waterloo Region in the contemporary setting. It's not just in the past, and it's not just the erasure of a pronounced Indigenous history in the region. From erasing the genocide of the neutral nations in a land acknowledgement, to not listening to the Indigenous leaders of the community who have spoken before council and to mayors about seeking outside consultation instead of hiring internal change, to the radio silence at council meetings where no questions are asked, to knowing that this is Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe traditional territory, but not acknowledging the many nations that share this space, to the expertise in the community being ignored in the seeking of an outside consultation. Erasure is particularly poignant here and deeply affects Indigenous people in the region. It is necessary that any consultation is based here by those who are here, and we have a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of experts and knowledge carriers here. All of this leads me to very, very serious concerns about how this process can be undertaken when the erasure is so complete that council and staff and other city groups and associations have no idea of even an extinction that has taken here, a total genocide, and no knowledge of a 20,000 person plus Indigenous community in contemporary times. At this camp, we are not protesting and we're not taking over anything. We are simply occupying land that has been occupied by our people since the land emerged from the water and ice. This is a part of the treaties that we have made and a part of the treaties between our people and with the settler people who are here now. Another important thing that has been brought up is that the cities and region and political entities of this territory have failed to pay their rent, their tribute, according to treaty, for 200 years. Erasure is a tactic of genocide, and this is an ongoing genocide that extends right into this modern day. Much like the destruction of any living thing on the land, extinction removal, erasure is genocide. In this, we're not simply asking for the waiving of fees or land use as one would for a family picnic. We are demanding our sovereign treaty rights as Indigenous people, rights guaranteed in our own agreements with you, as well as the Ontario Human Rights Code, the TRC, UNDRIP, Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women Summary Report, Feathers of Hope Report, and your own moral obligations as the corporations of your municipality of Waterloo to honor these agreements. Pardon me while I jostle my papers. So in this, we have put our bodies on the land because this has not been listened to. It has not been conducted in a way that has created any space or any voice for Indigenous people here. The TRC was from 2015, and if indeed there was any kind of action in 2018, we are now 2 years already and nothing has been done. Consultation is not consent, nor is consultation with others who are not in this space addressing the gaps we are filling with our reclamation. This has been addressed many times in this session. Consultation must include us, and by us, I do mean us at the camp. I mean the youth, I mean Two-Spirit people. I also mean the other organizations in the city, especially the ones that have been listed by previous delegations. We have been here for 65 days with 4 simple demands and no action has been taken, or very little anyway. And certainly the action that has been taken has been to address the most meager parts of the demands. And again, I want to underscore that it's not just use that we're asking for, and it's not just a waiving of fees, but that use does and needs to address our sovereign autonomy in space. So with that land acknowledgement at the beginning of every session, it's time to put action behind your words. It's time to truly acknowledge the land and the Indigenous people who live here. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara. Always speaking so forthright and giving us great information. And was pleased to let you go longer than your time allotment because you're on a roll there. So thank you very much, Tara. Do we have any questions for the delegate? I am seeing none, so I will ask that anybody go on mute, and we'll continue on with this staff report as we move into the next session, because there are no further delegates. And it is now, it's a staff report, and there is no presentation. Do I have questions from staff or from councillors? And well, I see Councillor Bodley and Councillor Hanmer are ready to go. Go ahead, Councillor Bodley.
Thank you, through Mayor Jaworski. I'm going to repurpose one of the questions from Delegate Lori Campbell there and ask this of staff, particularly related to recommendation 2, that staff be directed to develop a policy to support the access and use of public spaces by Indigenous peoples to carry out cultural and ceremonial practices. So the question is, which Indigenous people are going to help create this policy to ensure that it is meeting the needs of various Indigenous communities within the city?
And if there's a staff member who's actually responding right now, you're on mute.
Maybe I'll take a crack at it, Mayor Jaworski. It's Jim here. Staff currently are reaching out, as noted in the number of delegations that were here today. There is a plan to provide a consultant to help us with the development of a policy in public spaces for Indigenous peoples. As a result of that, we have reaching out to our many representatives to determine who will be on that particular selection committee for that consultative process. As such, I think for today's purposes, I'd like to take back some of the responses and some of the information and advice that's been given to us today back to the larger group to determine what steps we can do to include the number of Indigenous representatives that have spoken here today.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Jaworski, a follow-up if I can. So just for clarification, is recommendation 2 in our staff report is excuse me, is that as part of the region's consultation consulting work, or is this something that we are doing at the City of Waterloo on our own? Maybe some clarification there, because I'm not certain.
Yes, the intent is through you, Councillor Bodley. The intent is to have a develop policy to support the access of all public spaces for Indigenous peoples through this consultative process with the City of Kitchener and ourselves and the region. So we have a consistent and collaborative direction together.
Understood. Thank you for that clarification, Jim. And yes, I would just echo sort of the comments that you had just made around ensuring that you take that back and see what we can do to make sure that we are including representation from as many of the Indigenous communities as we can, including some of the folks that spoke today. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Jim and Councillor Bodley, for highlighting the fact that we want to be able to do this right and do it once, and so all local townships and that can benefit with respect to their policies. Next up, Councillor Rymer.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you, Councillor Bodley has actually articulated the question I was going to ask, and it was really to make sure that we have the voice of many of the people we heard today in whatever consultation that we're doing. And I truly agree that if we're developing a policy, we need to be able to hear and understand from all of us who are going to be affected by the policy to make sure that we're getting as much input as possible. So I appreciate the response to the questions and Councillor Bodley's questioning from Mr. Bowman. So I have no further questions.
Yeah,
if I may,
go ahead, Jim.
If I may, I think one of the key observations that I received today I've made copious notes, is that something as simple or something as sensitive as a death in which a ceremony is required very, very quickly is something that we have to address in terms of a gap in the consultation process. I think Lori mentioned that during her presentation. And I think that's all part of the challenge that we have, is to fully understand and fully have dialogue together in order to build the relationship and build the needs of the land back group's demands.
Thank you. And through, just to continue on these two questions so far, Jim, my thinking would be is that there's questions about the external consultant, the RFP, and it's really that the external consultant through the RFP will offer us advice on setting up something that is very likely more local. Is that correct, or is that something?
I believe that, yes, if I may, I believe that is the intent and the plan of action, and the fact that it will be somewhat of a necessity for myself and others who are working on this project to inform the other members of the group in order to facilitate those needs.
Yeah, so I think to council, you know, we don't want to guess too far beyond the RFP of where things might go, just as we don't with any RFP about where things might go. You know, we issue an RFP for Silver Lake and we decide how the engineering firm is going to do it. It would be speculative, but certainly that is coming through loud and clear that local voices are required on the what we call the, I think like we call it the advisory committee, although that matches up with other advisory committees we have, so something different than that. Next up, Councillor Vasic, please.
Thanks, through you, Mayor Jaworski. This might be jumping a little bit ahead, but because one of the demands from Land Back is Indigenous staff at the city, I'm just curious what sort of the general pre-consultation thoughts are about hiring Indigenous staff at the cities and the region for the purposes of truth and reconciliation work. Is that planned? What might that look like? Knowing that we are kind of starting from a place of, from my knowledge, settler staff and definitely settler council, myself included in that, to get the consultant. Sorry, I'm distracted by children and family running around. That white and settler staff are the ones who are kind of initiating this process, even though there is going to be consultation, and it sounds like even more robust consultation after this conversation, which is great. So just general thoughts about hiring Indigenous folks for TRC work post-consultation.
So my understanding is that we will be working with our human resources team as well to develop a process in order to facilitate that particular direction.
And then, okay, thank you. That's good. That's probably important to be working with HR internally. But then in terms of how to engage the local Indigenous folks and organizations and communities locally in that process, have you given some thought to what that might look like in hiring the Indigenous person or team potentially?
At this time, I don't believe I can speak to that, Councillor Vasic, because the team has not really fully addressed what that could look like. So, but the intent would be, based on the consultant process, how we would proceed with that direction. I mean, this time we have not discussed that at all.
Okay, all right, baby steps, got it. Thank you.
Thank you. And I see I have one more question to Councillor Monaco. Remember that we're on questions of staff at this point, and but if you have commentary on the staff report, that would be fine as well.
Thank you, Mayor Jaworski. No, it's fine. I was just saying, like, once we're done staff questions, if I may offer a comment, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we are done. I don't see any other questions of staff. And so we have a motion here to consider, but I'll let you, are you going to make a, would you like to move the motion, or you just want to make a comment at this point in time?
Just a comment is fine right now. That's,
okay,
I'm happy to move it, but it's really just I just wanted to thank the delegates. So is this the good time to do so?
Yeah, please, please.
Just so, I mean, as an immigrant myself, I'm learning alongside all settlers, both recent and generational. But as an Australian, I can see deep parallels with the treatment of Indigenous peoples all around the world. I know it's already been said, but reconciliation forms part of our strategic plan, and the strategic plan determines where the money goes. So I can affirm to all of the delegates today and anyone listening that this council does take this work seriously. We want to not just talk about reconciliation, we want to live it with you. So I just really wanted to thank all of the delegates for taking time to present today. your delegations and the petition that was presented, it places this local discussion within a broader global conversation. Locally, more than 350 people, it looks like, from Waterloo signed the petition, around 1,000 from across the region. Why? But I wanted to address one of your concerns, which is that action appears to be slow. I hear you, and I want you to know that we all hear you, but part of the reason is that we want to do it right. History is littered with the carnage of settlers doing what they assume is right. And I know it's hard to ask this of you, given that history, but I just wanted to ask you to please don't lose heart. We take this seriously, and we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. Thank you.
Thank you. And I actually did sort of put words in your mouth that you'd be willing to move it. I see Councillor Henry would be willing to second it, if that is.
Yes, I'm happy to, so this is Councillor Bonagor, I'm happy to move the motion and we'll vote in favour.
So it's moved by Councillor Bonagor, seconded by Councillor Henry, who would like a chance to comment on that. Go ahead, Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Mayor, and I'll echo Councillor Bonagor in thanking our delegates today who had who took time out of their day and their lives to help provide us valuable insight, information, and comments that are important for us to hear, which we have heard, and important for us to consider as we walk this path together. I think this is an important step that we can take today to take an immediate action on one of the requests with a commitment to do a more thorough and region-wide consistent approach to the issue of access to public space in a way that will be understandable and will understand what the needs are through deliberate dialogue with a wide swath of the local urban Indigenous community, including those members that have found space, culture, and belonging and themselves currently in Victoria Park. So we appreciate hearing all of those today. To echo the Mayor and Councillor Bonagor, as someone who, until we changed our specific rules around what we called the various meetings, was the chair of our Finance and Strategic Planning Committee, this was a central conversation that we were having during our strategic planning process. We very quickly heard back from staff on a high-level framework for responding to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action. We followed that through in the first budget that was before us after that point in committing resources over the next few years and committing them in a way that would be flexible to deal with what we heard and would allow us to make sure that we heard it and heard it well. And I think this is an excellent opportunity before us to collectively have a dialogue that has been missing for far too long in this community on important topics of belonging, of connection, and of mutual understanding and support with communities that have been harmed for far too long and for too many who continue to be harmed. And we need to work as quickly as we can in a way that is collaborative and understanding and consultative. So I look forward to the dialogues that are ahead, and I'm glad that we can take this immediate step today with commitments for walking the path together on even more as we respond to the TRC calls to action and on calls to action that we are hearing and have been hearing for some time from various members of our local Indigenous community.
Thank you, Councillor Henry. And with that, we'll continue. I don't think you voted on that one yet. You moved it, but seconded, but didn't vote.
Well, I missed that. I'm certainly voting in favor.
Okay. So, and then we'll start all the voting with Ward 1. Go ahead, Sandra.
Thank you. Councillor Hanmer, I'm very much in favor of the motion and moving us forward on our journey together.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Feith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Vasic in favor.
And the movers and seconders were in favor, and the mayor is in favor too, so that carries unanimously. Thank you to all the delegates, whether you from the Indigenous group, Land Back Camp, or from the settlers like ourselves who spoke so eloquently in support of this. I also want to do a shout out to our director, Jim Bowman, and of course, the wonderful Pam Albrecht, who's been working so hard on this diligently over the past number of months, and is always, like the rest of us, wanting to learn more and do the right thing. So thank you very much, Pamela. Okay. We are now going to move on to item B, which is the 2019-2020 Grant Update Report, a report prepared by Brad Witzel. Does anyone have any questions on this one from Brad? I see Councillor Bodley. Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm just trying to find the page so that I'm referencing the right thing here. Yes, okay, so in section 6, there's a commentary and discussion around the ICIP program, Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program from the federal government. And I'm wondering, I know there's some discussion in here around that, and that we're still sort of waiting for final sort of information, and there will be a report to council as appropriate. Just at a high level. Oh, sorry. At a high level, from an active transportation perspective in particular, are we considering new projects as part of this ICIP potential, or are we looking at projects within our 10-year capital program? Not just on the AT side, but if any comments on sort of initial thoughts on what that might look like, I would appreciate.
Hello, Mayor Jaworski. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you sound great, Brad.
Okay. So through the mayor to Councillor Bodley's question, I guess the first part is at this time, we still don't know if the province of Ontario will opt to transfer 10% of the funding into this new program. I did reach out to our local provincial rep, and at this time, the province is still considering this opportunity. So operating under the assumption that the province does opt in and not seeing the full framework under the active transportation realm, it could be a combination of both. It could be new projects, or it could also be looking at maybe advancing projects within the window and then backfilling them. So it's still likely too early to say without seeing the full program intake and what is eligible or isn't eligible. But at this time, we're still kind of in a holding pattern. So hopefully that helps.
It does. Thank you. Can you maybe just to I guess add to that, what is the process that we're going to undertake internally to determine what may or may not be part of that? Is there going to be any sort of engagement process? Is it staff driven? Are we talking to advisory committees? What might that look like? Even I know there's still a lot of unknowns around this particular program, but like historically with these types of programs, what might that look like internally in terms of deciding what we put forward as a proposal?
Yeah, to answer Councillor Bodley's second question, typically for these, what I'll refer to maybe as a little bit larger opportunities, we have formed a cross-functional working team that we can go through and look at what projects might fit well within terms of what the grant is trying to accomplish. So we're putting our applications forward with the best chance to be successful. And where there's other areas or working groups that can feed into that, we can definitely reach out and get input from them as well to help us set priorities. But the first step is kind of understanding the grant framework and then working internally to find our best candidate projects and how we can be successful with our applications.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that response. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it was a good question, Councillor Bodley. I was going to point that out on page 45 of our council package on the ICIP program, Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program. Unless the province decides to take advantage of it, there is no such program in Ontario. So there's certainly a lobbying effort going forward for that. And then if you look back one page, page 44, you'll see the current program where we had the Albert McCormick Arena Rim Park Community Hub, Waterloo Park Heritage Assets. Those are all sort of refurbishments, which might, and we're shut out of those. None of those are moving forward. They were not moved forward from the province to the federal government for consideration, just because there was a 10-to-1 ratio on programs, or sorry, on applications to the program. But however, they may in fact qualify for up to, help me, Brad, for up to how much on the new program? Is it up to $5 million?
Believe it's up to 10 million, Mayor, the project value.
Okay, so therefore there might be an opportunity to blow the dust off of the 3 programs that weren't included. So that may not include active transportation, or could include a hybrid of active transportation and existing projects. But it was disappointing to learn that those projects won't move forward. But there's certainly an opportunity in this program and in potentially others that Brad is looking into. Just as an FYI, this is a financial report, so I'll ask Councillor Henry if he cares to move along with Councillor Bonagor.
Happy to move the motion and vote in favor of it. Brad, keep trying to get us money.
Councillor Bonagor, I second the motion, and I second the keep getting money, Brad, and I vote in favor.
Councillor Hanmer, always in favor of getting additional money. Keep going.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Vasic in favor.
And the mayor's in favor too. Thank you very much. Certainly these grant applications are something that have been well worth the while over the past number of years. So to the entire team, thank you for continuing on the efforts in repatriating the money from the federal and provincial government back to our own citizens. Item C, the CAO procurement award summary, June to July 2020. Do we have questions on that? Don't think so. So let's go with the finance chair again.
Councillor Henry here. I'll move the motion and vote in favor.
This is Councillor Bonagor. I will second the motion and also vote in favor.
Councillor Hanmer in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Vasic in favor.
And I'm in favor too. That passes unanimously. Thank you to Jason for preparing that report for us. Next up is the extension of the regional road maintenance agreement. A report prepared by Christine Keeler and team to execute a 1-year extension for this one. Do you have any questions on that? Seeing none. Let's go with Ward 3 and 4.
Councillor Veith, I move the motion and vote in favor.
Thank you, Angela.
Councillor Freeman, I second the motion and vote in favor.
Councillor Vasic in favor.
Councillor Henry in favor.
Councillor Bonagor in favor.
Councillor Hanmer in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
And the mayor's in favor too. So let's continue on our agreement with the region on their roads and supporting them. Item E, pedestrian crossing flags. Can the councillor who brought this, or the person who brought this to our attention, I remember was a little student, was it from Eastbridge or where were they from? Which councillor?
It's from Ward 5, Sam, okay. And he goes to Dune High School. I actually don't know the name of the school, or to the Dune. It's not a high school, but he will be going to high school in the ward, I believe. Yeah.
Good. Okay, I just want to make sure I knew who it was because certainly Jenny's done all the work on this and has come up with this, certainly this recommendation, this report. Do I have any questions for Jenny on this report on pedestrian crossing flags? And I have, Councillor Basak.
Yes, through you, Mayor Jaworski. I sent this report to Sam for his feedback, and he was really appreciative of the opportunity to come to council and to have his idea considered. He did have a couple of other, one particular question. Understanding why the pedestrian flags weren't recommended or aren't recommended because they don't actually necessarily promote safety, which is the goal. He is curious, though, what alternate options are being considered to improve pedestrian safety at the intersections he highlighted, especially given schools beginning soon. And in particular, what's the city doing to support traffic calming in residential neighborhoods versus busy streets and intersections? So.
So through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Vasek. Unfortunately, we had committed to doing some studies at two intersections at Lincoln and Mayfield and Margaret and Lincoln this spring, but due to COVID, we had to put all of our studies and counts on hold. So we do have these two intersections specifically on our list for this fall, and we are going to get to those. We did complete 3 studies for the crossing guard at the intersection of Glenridge and University, which was another intersection that he had mentioned specifically, including discussions with student transportation services to determine the number of students that were on that north side that may even cross the street if we did put a guard there per se. All of the studies that we did concluded that a crossing guard is actually not warranted at that intersection at that time. We do go through on an annual basis all of our intersection counts and all of our road safety through our road safety program. We do a large review to understand what is going on around the city. And in particular, that's why we do have our traffic calming policy, so that we can go through them on a consistent basis to understand the operations and how we can do improvements for each of those. For the intersections in the areas around the schools, and I'll touch on this, I guess, in my later report, we work very closely with Student Transportation Services of Waterloo Region, the school boards, and the individual schools to discuss all options that may be of concern or any issues that they have around them, including those intersections. So it's a continuing and a continuous effort that staff make for these areas. So unfortunately, I don't have anything specific for those intersections to date, but I can follow up with Sam and the counselor at that time.
Thanks so much, Jenny. That's great. It's great to hear that a couple of intersections are on in the queue to get reviewed. Just a follow-up about Glenridge and University. What are the reasons it's not warranted? What are the criteria to determine whether it's warranted or not?
So when you do, there's a few things, sorry, through you, Mayor, to Councillor. There are a couple things that we do look at. If at a signalized intersection specifically, we look at conflicts. And when we say conflicts, we mean potential of a student or any pedestrian trying to cross the street, and there's a vehicle at the same time trying to make a maneuver to cross their path. We quantify that based on any other intersections in the region that also share similar geometric layouts and numbers. So there is a threshold that has to be met for the number of conflicts. We also look at the number of students as well. Because we have a very difficult time getting guards, we have to be very careful on where we place the guards, and we have to put them in locations where we feel they are most necessary. So that, in short, is what we look at for a signalized intersection for a guard.
Thanks so much, Jenny. I know Sam will be glad to reconnect with you. Thanks.
And while I have you on the line, Councillor Vasek, I bet you want to move this.
Oh, yes, definitely. I move and I am in favor.
Also in favor.
Yeah. Yes.
Excellent. Thanks.
Councillor Henry here, I'll second it and also vote in favor.
Councillor Bonagor in favour.
Councillor Hanmer in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
And the mayor's in favor too, so that carries. Next up, don't go away, Jenny. Traffic and parking bylaw amendments, school area speed limits, a report prepared for us by Jenny Setterfield. And